Right, so good morning. I'm the cabaret. I'll try not to fall over or offend anybody too much. But yeah, what we want to talk about is sort of the impact of what I sort of loosely call the algorithmic era on the sectors and on how we innovate in those sectors. So that's what I'll endeavour to do. So by way of introduction, I edit a newsletter called Shift Academy, which is about sort of enterprise AI, not so much just about the tech, but also very much about the people side, the adoption, and in particular, the organizational change side. Because, you know, this is not a technology that we can just bolt on to our sort of 19th century offices full of scribes and people sitting in spreadsheets every day. It has implications for the way that we organize work. So among my sort of research interests, one is the idea of programmable organizations, the idea that that's sort of where we're headed. In other words, organizations as software to a large extent, a sort of very human form of software, but also the boring stuff. Because, you know, I've got loads of experience trying to digitally transform accounting firms, magic circle law firms, you know, you name it. And really, the hard bit is getting through that crunchy middle of, you know, internal business support functions, you know, audit, compliance, risk, and this sort of marshmallow layer of generic management meat that sort of sits on top of everything and slows things down and makes it a bit bureaucratic. So I think there's a lot that we can do even today with the existing tech we have to make these organizations operate in a more sort of active way. So that's me. I'm a sort of technologist and a social scientist by background. So when we talk about the algorithmic age in terms of the sectors, what do we mean? I think as Stephen alluded to, you know, these sectors have a rich history, a very important history. You know, if you go back to the earliest forms of written human communication, they're not poetry, they're Mesopotamian merchants complaining that their delivery was underweight, right? So, you know, accounting for things, quantifying things, all of this stuff is hugely important in human history. And I think trust is a really key word here because, you know, we couldn't do exploration around the world without Lloyd's of London and trusted shared risk models in insurance. You know, we can't invest in long-term projects unless we can trust the accounts of the companies that we're investing in. And the same with the legal sector as well. You know, we need a trusted legal environment in order to operate freely. And so I think this is a really important concept. Now, the way that the technology is headed, we sort of have a fork in the road. We have trustful systems. We can use technology to increase the surface area of human trust. But we also have another fork in the road, which is trustless systems. So, you know, Web3, Bitcoin, all that kind of stuff is about, you know, what we call, you know, sort of zero knowledge proofs and creating, you know, sort of predictable scenarios in the absence of human trust. And although I'm very interested in the technology side, I'm more interested in the human trust side. So I would like to see the professions advance in a way that increases the surface area of trust between people and between organizations. That's my sort of take on it. But, you know, it's not just that these sectors have performed as sort of a baseline foundation, you know, underpinning the work of business. They've also been part of innovation themselves. So, you know, open banking, you know, the idea of a protocol that means that I can connect my apps to different banks and different financial providers, you know, that's something that exists within the sectors, which promotes sort of secondary and tertiary innovation, creates opportunities for new fintechs, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, similarly, if you go back to the history of the City of London, you know, Eurobonds, the law firms that wrote the first Eurobonds, you know, they transformed the city. So innovation has come out of these sectors and actually led to lots and lots of other business opportunities for others as well. So I think I'd like to see the sectors be a force multiplier for that kind of business innovation in the future as well. But you know, what I find really interesting is that if you look at the work of, let's say, a large accounting firm or financial institution, it's basically a series of offices and people running processes and using lots and lots of individual algorithms, only at the moment these algorithms are buried in spreadsheets, right? So the characteristics of the sectors are that they are knowledge-based, very pure knowledge-intensive organizations. They are already algorithmic, and they have what we call controlled vocabularies. In other words, the language of law, the language of accounting, the language of finance is known to us. It's a bounded domain of knowledge. And that's precisely the kind of area where AI thrives. It's not all things to all people. It's not, massive LLMs that can do anything. It's applying AI to very tightly bounded knowledge domains, which is a lot more reliable, and they can do a lot more with that kind of work. So I think the fact that these services have these characteristics means that they are among the most potentially useful areas to be transformed by AI, agentic technology, automation, and so on and so forth. And I think this is happening already. There's a number of stories about back office automation, or in BDO's case, middle office automation. It's happening already today. So we're deriving marginal, incremental efficiencies in the way that we work already today with AI. The real challenge is, how do we change what we do? And that's the next phase, and that's not something that you can just, as I say, bolt on technology to. You need to look at the architecture of the firms, you need to look at what we do, how we work, how we go from a world of processes to services and capabilities. And I think that's really interesting. But if you look at law, Richard Susskind, very eminent commentator and an advocate for literally 20 or 30 years of AI in law, he's really convinced that this is it now, and the legal practice and the legal sector will really be transformed by AI. So I think it's a really interesting time for us to have this discussion today. It's a really interesting time for us to look at the projects that UKRI have funded and see to what extent can they not just do something interesting themselves, but to what extent can they create new capabilities in the ecosystem that will lead to those force multiplier effects that we talked about earlier. Now, a good place to start is automating the boring stuff, because one of my critiques of the old nature of the firm, not just in the sectors, but in corporations in general, is that, it was sort of like a machine made of people, right? We treated people like cogs. They just did their process work, and they operated as if they were a machine with a vast management overhead on top. And I think where we're headed is that we can use machines to do the machine stuff precisely to create more freedom and more space for humans to do the stuff that they are really good at. So that begins with automating the boring stuff. And we had research just last week from Minnesota Law. They looked at a pretty good experiment of running standard legal matters and practices and processes. And they found in excess of 100% productivity gains by using AI on the simple stuff like investigating a matter, sending initial letters of action, all that sort of thing. So we're there already. This is not the future, right? This is something that's available to us today. And this kind of digitization, when paired with experts who are empowered to work, not like cogs in a machine, but like high agency individuals that they really are in these sectors, that's going to be where we get the best possible outcome, I think. Now, I mentioned earlier, I've wasted a lot of my life banging my head against the wall of absurdly stupid business practices in these sectors. I'm sure we still live in a world of nonsensical meetings which are about showing off the new suit that the senior person's got or making you feel small. We also send a lot of documents by email, the final version, nobody knows where it is, but, all this happens. And all of this stuff, finally, is on its way out, right? We have digital technologies, we have collaboration platforms. I created, collaboration knowledge systems 20 years ago in some of the Magic Circle firms, that at least now are finally starting to come to fruition, and people are using that as a way of working. In my work, I use a wiki and Slack and I can pretty much do more in a day than most of my clients can do in a week. It's really that simple. I don't do email. I have a doctor's note that says I can't use Microsoft Word because it's so dumb. So we just work in a different way. That's the beginning. But as I said, we need to move on from that stage to the stage of actually changing what we do, not just making these processes slightly more efficient. And of course, and this is partly why we're here today, these are not separate sectors. These are sort of connected ecosystems, right? Much of the work in the back office of an accounting firm is similar to a fintech firm, is even similar to a legal firm when it comes to compliance and risk and so on and so forth. And so what I would like us to do today is to really see these as connected ecosystems and not just think about what the projects create, not just think about what the firms need, but think about what's out there for consumers, for individuals, for small startups as well, and think of the capabilities that we can bring to these ecosystems. And we'll do a little workshop in the afternoon where we'll discuss some of the projects and we'll discuss that kind of ecosystem view a little bit more. So, if you go back to 13th century Florence, the rise of double entry bookkeeping, that was a core capability that completely transformed the way that we ran businesses, in Europe at least from the 13th century onwards. Arguably, India actually had been doing double entry bookkeeping a lot earlier, but it became popularized. That kind of core foundational capability, let's create some new ones, right? Let's not just use AI as a piece of tech that's exciting because it's trendy and it's in the magazines. Let's actually look at the practice of what we do and try and create meaningful new business capabilities out of that. So where are we headed? A quick sort of review of where we're at with AI in the firms. Well, Mark Andreessen, he of an infeasibly large forehead, now sadly lost to Trumpism. He said, software is eating the world. And then another unfeasibly large forehead, but this time with a leather jacket, turned up more recently and said, actually, yeah, software is eating the world, but AI is eating software. And that's actually a good introduction, I think, to what's going on. Software is a very, very powerful thing, but it's been owned by a sort of priesthood of, rather smelly individuals in T-shirts living in basements. And now with AI, actually all of us can create software, and our organizations can have a more fluid relationship with technology as a result. So it is genuinely, I think, a very exciting time. At the moment, Gen AI is sort of in the cheating in your homework phase, right? So I get phone calls from my daughter. She's doing, biopharmacology or something I don't really understand, and she has difficult problems, and I pretend as a dad to help out, and I just go onto Claude, ChatGPT, do a quick piece of research, find some facts, and then try and help her that way. If we look at these activities which typically are being used in organizations today, probably all of those have a place in professional services firms, fintech organizations, accounting firms, and so on. So it's already happening. People are using these, maybe not with the controls and security and safety that we would like, but that's what happens if you let people sort of just get on with it without the organization getting involved and taking it seriously. And of course we have reliability concerns, we have hallucinations that emerge from some of these LLMs, but I think we're getting towards solutions for most of those things. For me, the most exciting concept is this idea of prompting, what we call prompt engineering, or some people call it prompt whispering, finding out what combination of instructions will get a really smart result from an LLM. And what we're seeing is, with a single prompt, you can create a career coach application. And then with a second prompt, you can train it on your organization's own internal data, right? This is genuinely a superpower. If you think about the evolution of human language, we went from sort of sounds and complaining about Mesopotamian under-deliveries to, poetry and novels and operas and things where a few words convey vast information because we all know what those words mean. They're signifiers, right, to our culture and what we share. And software is very similar. When I started out, I was doing basic coding, I was doing machine language, literally 40 years ago. And now what happens with software is it becomes much more highly abstract. You can say, oh, create me a new platform. And even 10 years ago, a new platform would roll out on your computer. But now we've got to a stage where technology evolution and human evolution are coming together in the sense that we can just tell computers what to do with our own human language. That, trust me, is an incredible superpower. And the more quickly we sort of embrace that within organizations, I think the faster we will create some really interesting outcomes. So, for example, I can write a prompt saying, calculate the feasibility of entering the Saudi market with this product in 3 years. If the projection looks good, build me a team and start giving me a pipeline of internal hires. It sounds like magic, but that's possible today, not with tomorrow's technology, but with what we already have. Now, another good way to think about Gen AI is that really it's a social knowledge machine. It's taking what we've already written and it's sort of doing clever things with it and presenting it back as intelligence. But actually, all of that intelligence comes from us. Now, there is a risk that if we train it on the internet over the last 20 years, perhaps the quality is questionable, let's say, and there may be a lot of untrue things and really stupid things that kids have said on the internet, which are now flowing into LLMs. But actually, increasingly, what companies are doing is they're training LLMs on their own knowledge stock, their own data, their own internal documents, and so on. So it's a really interesting process. But, just to give you a sort of a data point, the human brain consumes about 0.48 kilowatt hours of electricity to function in a day. A typical house might take 29 kilowatt hours. ChatGPT for a query is more like 500 megawatt hours. So ChatGPT uses about 1 million times the power of a human brain to do what it does. And I would argue that we have a lot of human brains in existence today which are underutilized. Perhaps they're lacking opportunity, or perhaps they're trapped in a middle management role where it's not required to use that particular organ. But we can do a lot more with that brain power, and it's much more efficient from an energy usage point of view. So I really want to see a future where we're not replacing people, but we're elevating people, we're augmenting human intelligence, and we're doing more with what we already have. And I think if you think about it as a social knowledge machine, that's a good starting point for that. However, although it's unreliable, on a large scale, within these narrow domains, like legal, accounting, fintech, and so on, it's incredibly reliable because the language is clear, it's clearly bounded, and we know what we're dealing with. So, I can tell an LLM, with one prompt, create me a series of pendula that swing and study it. It will do that right off the bat. This is simple stuff for LLMs, but it's sort of magical for us. And I think the next stage that we're looking at is that we don't just use one big LLM to do everything. What we do is we create lots of very specialized small agents, and we combine those agents, a research agent, a planning agent, a testing agent, maybe a compliance agent that goes and checks against applicable law. And we sort of chain these agents together to actually create better process work inside organizations. So that's sort of where we're headed. And if we can do that with a degree of human oversight and human control, then I think we're in a good place, a safe space, and we can actually get some good outcomes and not risk the farm. But for this to happen, there's going to be a real unbundling of processes, an unbundling also of jobs, because jobs are sort of bundles of tasks and roles that we give a title to and we apply a salary to. So we're going to see a sort of an unbundling and a rebundling both in human roles and also in process work within organizations as well. And that's difficult work, it's change work, it's going to take time, but it's really necessary so that we can find where can the agents do well and where should the people be in charge and doing the creative work on top. And getting that combination right is really difficult. So we're going to see all of these things embedded into what we think of as business capabilities. We're not just going to use features of AI because it's cool. We're going to try and build meaningful business capabilities that get things done in our organization. And we'll find the right combination of people, machines, software, data, and all the rest of it. And hopefully, these can become the sort of building blocks for a new era of combinatorial innovation, because most innovation is not inventing a new thing, it's combining what already exists in a new and exciting way. That's what Gutenberg did with the printing press, that's what Steve Jobs did with the iPhone. All of the components existed already, but he put it together in a new way. And I think that's what's exciting in terms of the ecosystem view for these sectors as a whole. And then I think where we're probably going to end up architecturally or structurally is that firms have their own sort of service platform that organizes all of this stuff, all of this automation, and then on top of that platform, people work in a much more free, agile, creative way to, add value to their customers, their clients, their partners, and so on. So the big question really is, if we have this sort of magical command line, what do we ask it to do? What do we want to change in our organizations in order to embrace this stuff and make it happen? That's a really exciting time. So very briefly, just to wrap up, I'm going to just cover some of the existing sort of extant use cases that we're seeing out there, in the sectors today. So first of all, lots of organizations are using concierge bots to help people navigate complex process landscapes, find meeting rooms, identify people that can help them in a large organization, that sort of thing. And I think we're also seeing the rise of personal research agents as well, personal search agents that learn your preferences, learn your interests, and start to go and gather you useful information. So that's something that's really easy to do today, and I think I'm seeing that more and more in firms that we talk to. I think the second thing is trying to create what we call centaur teams. In other words, teams which are part machine, part human. So the reason we call it that is this is Kasparov, 1997, his second defeat to an AI computer, Big Blue, head in his hands, and he went on to have a really rich period of centaur chess after this, where he found the optimum combination of multiple AIs with teams of people who were controlling them. And for a while, centaur chess, was the most successful. Now AI, unfortunately, beats everything, so they can't do that anymore. But what I think we're going to see in organizations is a small team, the size of one of these tables, that uses tech like a DevOps team uses orchestration tech in the IT department, and you're going to have 5, 10 people doing the work of what we now have 100 scribes, wearing nice suits and ties doing in the back office. That's a really interesting thing. It's not just about getting rid of jobs. That's not the goal. It's about just doing work better and creating higher level opportunities for high agency people to be creative. Another good use case is knowledge synthesis. So this was a one prompt, or what we call a one-shot prompt, where someone said, go and grab me Tesla's data for Q1 2024 and write me an interactive business intelligence report that I can share with people to find the insights. Literally, 2 lines of text, and that's what you get from an LLM. But in areas like medicine, in areas like law, scientific discovery, using knowledge synthesis is a way of overcoming the sheer vastness of these domains, right? No lawyer today can know every single, case history, across such a long period of time. But you can get these little helpers to synthesize knowledge for you. And we're seeing this a lot in medicine discovery. We're also seeing it a lot in law and accounting as well. One of the powerful things that we can do, as I mentioned earlier, is if we can imagine it, we can build it. So rather than us just imagine things on our own, let's go out there, work with our clients, work with our partners, work with even end consumers, and get them to draw the perfect experience for what they would like to get. A bit of law, a bit of accounting, a bit of credit, a bit of finance, whatever the combination is, let's find the right journey that supports their business, and then we can just instruct these powerful tools to go and create that, or assemble the pieces from our internal service platform to make that happen. If you can imagine it, you can build it, and I think that's quite exciting. But back to the boring stuff. One of my critiques of compliance and audit, for example, is they're so damn manual. Why do we send in a team of children in suits with spreadsheets to go and gather data imperfectly and then write a one-off report? Doesn't make any sense, right? Audit should be a 24/7 real-time background activity, and it can be. There's nothing stopping that. Same with compliance. We don't want the poor cowed compliance officer in a big bank sitting there in the corner trying to beg the traders not to do illegal things. We want compliance to be baked into the system, right? Baked into the platform we use. That's the way these things are headed. And of course, on a human side, the other thing that we can do, and lots of friends of mine are doing already, is sort of decision support. We all have biases, we all have blind spots, we all make poor decisions from time to time. But using an AI as a sort of discussant or a thinking partner is actually quite a powerful way of setting some parameters. This is how I want to make the decision. This is what I know. This is what maybe I don't know. You know, what method would you use to make that particular decision? So that's quite a human, almost a coaching role that I think that we're seeing executives use today. And finally, I share this slide just for the word vibe coding, which is just such a sweet expression. But where we're headed is not just low-code development, it's no-code development. You know, anyone can create tools, apps, and software. Whether they should or not is another question. Ask your IT department. But, you know, anyone can do that through what we call vibe coding. They can just describe what they're trying to achieve. They can have a discussion about the specification and what's possible, what's not possible, and they can create stuff themselves. You know, 20 years ago, I saw lawyers building their own contract assembly systems in code because the official version was just not good enough, or because IT didn't want to take on the project. So there's a lot of really nerdy professional services people out there who are experimenting and doing things. And I think we should really embrace that because they know what they need and they know the subject, you know, better than anybody else. But just to close, slightly over time, I do apologize. Tech is the easy bit. With all of these things, adoption is difficult. That's why we've got some projects upstairs looking at how we help with adoption. Change management, learning, how we train people. I mean, goodness knows how we bring on new cohorts of, you know, associates in law firms or accountants who need training. You know, it's really hard when you take away a lot of the basic work with AI, then to have a pathway for education. So that's one of the many challenges that we face. But we really need innovators like the projects that UKRI have funded, some of whom are here today, to really think out of the box a little bit and combine all of these different capabilities and affordances, not just to do one thing or build a new app or whatever, but to really build new capabilities that we can all use within these sectors to enrich the ecosystem. So, you know, we're leaving behind the old world of, you know, offices being like factories, you know, a management class controlling everything. We're going to have a world of sort of high agency, well-educated individuals who are able to do much more than they've ever been able to do in the past, using the augmentation that's possible with this kind of technology. But we've got to get the line right between people and machines. You know, one thing I loved about the open source Apollo mission images is you really get to see, you know, the look on someone's face when they've flown up to the moon in a small rusty tin can that's governed by handwritten code, you know, that individuals have written out and corrected as they went along. You know, this shows what humans are capable of when they have the desire to do something new, they have the desire to explore, and it shows a really positive human-first relationship, actually, between people and technology. And I think it's sort of good to have that in mind, you know, when we're deciding what to automate, what to augment, what to replace, because there's a lot of societal implications in all of that stuff. But for me, and this is actually why I do a lot of executive education work these days, you know, teaching leaders and partners and so on what's possible in terms of the architecture and the way that their companies work is such a huge challenge because we've grown up with 200, 300 years of practice, you know, that is changing, you know, very rapidly. So learning is, I think, key to how we make this work. But, you know, we'll have loads to talk about throughout today, and this was just a way of sort of throwing some silly ideas and pictures at you to get you woken up in the morning. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day.